Hey guys, this is Austin. Here is something I did not expect to say. Today, Apple has not only made their cheapest MacBook better, but they've also cut the price. There was a time not all that long ago that Apple was the undisputed leader in laptops. Now their touchpads are still the top of the class, but even 10 years ago the MacBook had a better touchpad than a lot of PCs today. Think back to the original MacBook Air, it was so ahead of its time. Now sure, today we take thin and light laptops for granted, but it was by far the first Ultrabook, and that was years before that became a normal thing on the PC side. But when it comes to the Mac today, well, it's complicated. So on one hand, we have systems such as the Mac Mini as well as the iMac Pro, which are pretty solid packages. We even have things like the Mac Pro coming out, which while it is incredibly expensive, looks like a monster. Just a very expensive monster. On the laptop side though, I love the build and the form factor of the current generation MacBook Pro, but the issue here is that it just can't keep up on the performance side. There are serious throttling issues, especially when you get up to the 15-inch with that Core i9. Yeah, it sounds like a great idea, but the issue is that it barely is able to keep up with the base clock speeds while stock, and as soon as you start loading any kind of graphics workload, the entire performance suffers. It's a good machine, and it is about as good as you can expect for something that's this thin, but it just can't keep up with Windows laptops with similar specs. Then there's the keyboard. So I've actually been fairly fortunate with it. So I've been using a MacBook Pro since 2016 as my work laptop, and I've only had one single issue with a sticky key, but a lot of people such as Dave as well as Lou have had much bigger issues with keys double pressing, not working at all. Very quickly some of these keyboards have been completely useless, and the problem is if you do have something like this, it's not as simple as like blowing it out with some compressed air. The keyboard is straight up useless and it requires a very expensive repair, which up until fairly recently was something that you usually had to pay for. Now it did take Apple a while to respond to this, however they have redesigned the keycaps actually a couple of times on these MacBooks, so theoretically the version in this new MacBook Pro as well as the new Airs is better, but still, it's not exactly reassuring when you spend well over $1,000 on a laptop and something like a broken key means that you need like a $800 repair. That's just not a good look. But today we have some upgrades to check out, and that starts with the MacBook Air. Now this got a much needed redesign late last year, however today we also see a price cut to go along with that. It goes from $1,200 down to $1,100. Now it's not $999 like the old MacBook Air, which by the way as of today is now discontinued, so you have to go with the Retina guy, but there are some very minor upgrades with this new version. So first of all, it does add a True Tone display. Cool, I guess. And it also does have that updated keyboard, which theoretically should be a little bit more durable. Now time will tell whether this keyboard is actually better, so there's only been a few months since this keyboard went out in the wild with the 15-inch MacBook Pro, but the good thing is that unlike in the past where you had to pay for a very expensive upgrade to kind of repair the entire thing, instead now Apple does cover you for 4 years from when the MacBook comes out, so even if you buy one of these Airs today, you know that you'll be covered for quite a while if you do have any keyboard issues. What we've also seen is the death of the 12-inch MacBook. Man, this is such a weird tiny little laptop. Well, I guess we did ask why it existed, and they killed it. Just like when we asked, why does the iPod still exist? And they killed that, like right after. This came out back in 2015, and it was absolutely tiny. At a time where the MacBook Air was way out of date, this was something which is significantly smaller, and it also included the Retina display, it had the interesting butterfly keyboard, which of course has been a little bit of a problem over the years, but this legitimately was way ahead of its time. And even today, I still feel like this is my favorite ultra portable hardware that I've ever used on a laptop. So tiny, so lightweight, but there of course are some sacrifices that had to be made. With only a single USB-C port, there was a lot of, shall we say, complaining on the internet. I may have done some of this complaining myself, but the issue here was twofold. First of all, having only one port on the laptop meant that you couldn't charge and use anything else at the same time unless you were using a dongle. Sort of a big deal. But on the top of that, this was the really first laptop, one of the first devices straight up that used USB-C. Now today, it's actually fairly ubiquitous. It's not that hard to get a lot of accessories. But back in 2015 when this first came out, USB-C was pretty much nowhere, which meant that you had very limited options to do anything besides charge your MacBook and use like one Apple dongle, which was like $80. It was very limiting. Yeah, you still have to deal with a dongle, and yes, I still wish this did have multiple ports, but I've got to say, I'm actually kind of a little bit sad to see the 12-inch MacBook go. Rest in peace, little guy. As far as I'm concerned though, the most interesting new Mac is the MacBook Pro 13-inch. Now previously there were two versions of this laptop. The base model, which did not have a touch bar, started at $1,300, and the model with the touch bar was $1,800. That $500 worth of savings sounds like a big deal, but you lost a lot for it. So first of all, not only do you go down from 4 Thunderbolt ports to 2, but of course you lose the touch bar and with it the T2 chip as well as Touch ID. And on top of that, you had an older dual-core processor instead of a much faster quad-core chip in the higher-end model. Very clear decision, the lower model was pretty much worse across the board. However, as of today, that's really not the case. Now, at the same $1,300 price, you can buy this. So this is the new base model of the 13-inch MacBook, and it takes everything that was great about the previous version and adds the touch bar, which, I mean, is not the biggest deal in the world, but with the touch bar, we get not only Touch ID, but also that T2 chip. And importantly, we also upgrade to a quad-core processor. Really, the most obvious sort of downside to this guy is that we're still limited to 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, but honestly, I think that's a pretty reasonable trade-off considering that this is a full $500 cheaper than the higher-end model. Now, I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but the T2 chip actually does make a pretty big difference to these MacBooks. Not only does it speed up things such as video encoding with things like H.265, John did a great video talking about just how powerful this is for editing. For most people though, the jump to a quad-core processor is really where the sweet spot happens. Now previously, the dual-core was fine for basic use, but I mean, this is a MacBook Pro after all, so if you start doing, especially like photo and really when it comes to video editing, it started to fall down a little bit, right? But now with a quad-core processor and the pretty decent Iris graphics, this is straight up a system that you can use for real pro work, well, at least within reason for a 13-inch laptop. What's really interesting is that now when you look at the base 2-port model versus the 4-port model, that $500 difference seems like a decent thing on paper. So this model does have a slower processor clocked at 1.4 gigahertz compared to 2.4 on the higher model. They're both quad-core. But as soon as I started actually getting into this, I realized that's actually not really accurate. So if you look at the model number, it's almost the exact same on this Core i5, and when you start running it through benchmarks, the performance is nearly identical. Really, the only place that I saw any significant difference was it's a little bit slower in multi-thread, especially in bigger applications such as Cinebench. But even though it looks like a huge difference on paper, this, for almost all intents and purposes, has the same performance as that much more expensive MacBook. Don't let that spec fool you. All of this begs the question of which MacBook makes sense in 2019. With the 12-inch no longer in the picture, it really does come down, at least on the lower end, to the 13-inch MacBook Pro or the 13-inch MacBook Air. Now, something important to know is that these two laptops are very, very similar. I mean, if you look at them from a lot of angles, they look almost identical, right? I mean, the screens are the same size and resolution, you've got the same keyboards, you have the same touchpads, same speakers. I mean, the footprints are essentially identical here. Really, the main advantages to the MacBook Air is that it is a little bit cheaper and it is very, very slightly thinner. For $200 less, you are getting only a dual-core processor, which is a lower wattage than what you're finding on the quad-core chip with the MacBook Pro. Really, the main difference is just that performance, right? So many other aspects of these systems are identical that it comes down to whether or not you actually need it. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you're doing anything more than like light web browsing, then that quad-core processor is going to make a difference, especially as time goes on. I mean, this just feels a little bit slow right now, and it's certainly not going to feel as snappy 3, 5, 7 years from now as the Pro does. When it comes to picking between the Pros, I mean, sure, the higher end version does come with a little bit more storage as well as 2 extra Thunderbolt ports, but beyond that, there's still a minimum of a $300 price difference. As far as I'm concerned, that is incredibly hard to justify. I mean, yeah, more ports is nice, but is it $300 nice? These updates don't fix the MacBook line, but it's nice to see them get a little bit cheaper, a little bit better, and importantly, Apple's getting a little bit closer to being on top of their game. Honestly, it's been a long time since I've been able to say that the MacBook line makes sense, but today it's actually pretty balanced.